Welcome back to YellowCard Vanguard. I'm your host Toku from It's Toku TV on Twitch. It has been a long while and Clan Collection 5 and 6 have already been out for quite some time, but I figured this is going to be a mainstay of the channel, so I've taken some time out of my failing job search to give you, the viewers, what you want. My based, red-pilled, and Replica takes on the new cards and supports for Clan Collections 5 and 6. Once again, we need to preface the video as well as the rest of the series by letting you know that these lists are made at face value using my skills of card evaluation. They will need playtesting to fine-tune, but I hope they will serve as a good reference point for filthy net deckers to piggyback off of. Welcome back to Clan Collection Cores. I was honestly considering keeping this list private because I think it is something very interesting and might have potential in stealing games, so it was something I was tinkering around with, but this is the new Giraffa deck. Let's run over the new cards and talk about the list afterwards. There is a lot. The new grade 3, the Mafia boss himself, the one that fights with facts and logics, Evil Armored Sovereign, Ura-Giraffa, a reverse. Once per turn, when he attacks the Vanguard, you can counterblast 1, and your opponent calls at least 1 card from hand as rest. Auto effects don't activate. Yes, even Jewel Knight's effects don't. Stop asking. If your opponent called less than the number of grade 3 Giraffas in your soul, you can lock a rearguard to stand this unit. Secondly, and during your turn, when your opponent's rearguard is placed, lock a rearguard and all of your front row units gain 15k. All in all, what you can glean from the combination of effects is on attack a counterblast 1, block 1 to 3 units, and buff your front row 15 to 45k. Unfortunately, this call does not stun those units, so your opponent can use those units on their turn after, but forcing call overs is effectively retiring at least. The new grade 2 is Mega Colony Battler S. When placed on a rearguard circle, Soul Blast 1 and your opponent calls 1 from hand as rest and draws 1, auto effects are not activated. And in the drop zone, if your opponent has no standing units, discard a card to call this to an empty rearguard circle to soul charge 1. Good thing that this card is grade 2 so we can intercept with it and get him back into the drop zone. I don't think it would be as good as a grade 1. Now the new grade 1, Mega Colony Battler M. When placed on the Guardian Circle, for every 2 of your opponent's rested units, gain 5k shield. And when retired from Guardian Circle, if your opponent has no standing units, call this to an empty rearguard circle and soul charge 1. A very good defensive tool. It can 25k shield against a full rested board, and good in the early game to insulate against early damage while plussing to soul as well as board. I personally really like the 2 new support cards. I just wish they weren't so restrictive. Grade 2 Giraffa only looked for 1 or less standing, so I don't know why these 2 couldn't also check for 1 or less either. Being forced to call into empty circles is also unneeded condition. Regardless, I find that there's so much potential in Ura-Giraffa. A full back row lock is 45k to the front row, which is 135k power distributed across your front. That is a lot of power. 45k to each unit is also 3 triggers worth of power, which usually means something is going to hit that turn. Let's look at my list's winning game plan. Put simply, we want to use Ura-Giraffa's front row buff to buff our Death Warden Antlions 45k. Ignoring triggers, these lads would be hitting at 67k with Sentinel Restrict. No, it's not as big as Hamiel, but our opponents being forced to call down extra units to play around our cards should help play towards them. If we can push 45k to the front turn after turn, we should be able to push our opponent to 3 or 4 damage, in which case an Antlion swing should be able to close out the game. You'll notice that I don't run the original Giraffa, and frankly, that's because it sucks. It feels too slow and doesn't really get the power required to force damage on that initial ride, where re-riding into Ura-Giraffa would spell lethal. The pattern of trying to get multiple grade 3 Giraffas into slow is also slow as hell as well. And until we get 3 different grade 3s into soul, we don't threaten the restand, which also could end game, so it does take a really long time to try and scale. Instead, with this concept, we look to immediately ride into Ura-Giraffa on a grade 3 ride, and with its skill, we at least get 15k to the front. Every other Giraffa in hand then becomes a rewrite for a PG. I think the sweet spot happens when we get 2 Giraffas in soul, in which case our opponent is forced to call 2 down to deny the restand, and coupled with Mega Colony Battler S, we can get the 3 calls required to get the 45k to the front row and push with Antlion for game. We have some really good units that we can lock for Ura's skill as well, including Durian Blister and High Moth, so I'm not too worried about the lock cost. just a way to build advantage as we grind our opponent towards lethal. Let's review the list. 4 copies of Ura-Giraffa, 0 copies of Giraffa, and 3 copies of Antlion. Antlion is the unit we try to end games with, and yes, although the cost is heavy and makes us vulnerable to the crackback, we hope that there isn't one. In our grade 2 lineup, I've chosen to run 4 copies of Elite Mutant Giraffa, 3 copies of Battler S, and for the time being, 4 copies of Bloody Hercules. Elite Mutant Giraffa continues to be one of Mega Colony's best grade 2 units, not only getting a lot of power to stick a damage in, but also a draw. It isn't rare to see this usually swing around 40 to 50k per turn. I also run 4 copies of Bloody Hercules at the moment. This does get replaced by another promo currently in NFT jail at the moment, but at the moment I really like Bloody Hercules for its on-hit countercharge, and with how large a front row gets, the on-hit probably happens more often than not. Finally, 3 copies of Mega Colony Battler S. Once we get 1 copy of S in rotation, as long as our opponent doesn't leave a standing unit, we are able to continually intercept with it, call it out of drop, to ask for at least 1 from hand, which is then 15k to the front. Then Ura-Giraffa's effect can also give us another 15k to the front for a fast 30k to the front row from the get-go. Its second effect, also randomly soul charging, can help speed up our Giraffa count, albeit rare, but helps nonetheless. As for our grade 1 lineup, we run another really good Mega Colony generic card that happens to also be Giraffa in Pupa Mutant Giraffa. Usually a Soul Blast 1-2-0, draw 1 on place. It also has a very cool interaction in our list where we can immediately cycle out Mega Colony Battler S into the drop zone and filter it for the grade 2 Giraffa. We also run another fantastic defensive offensive option, Brilliant Blister. Brilliant Blister also serves to be a very good lock option as you can unlock it and then bounce it back at the end of the turn. Brilliant Blister also has an incredibly defensive skill where you can force a rearguard to rest if used while the opponent's Vanguard is rested. Just be careful that when you use this, when you stun that unit, your opponent doesn't have a standing booster, otherwise you will turn a lot of your plays off. We run a full playset of M. M stands for me. That's me right there. Yeah, I'm the M. I really like using M in the early game to start developing a board as well as starting to soul charge. One of my tenets of V Premium format is that grade 1 and grade 2 are the easiest parts of the game to guard, so this is where M becomes the easiest to use. Finally, 3 copies of a high-class moth as our countercharge engine. Cute bonus of acting as a grade 3 in Soul for Antlion, but also a fantastic unit to lock for Ura-Giraffa. Going into our trigger lineup, we run 10 crits and 2 draw sentinels. The reason we don't go for 8-4 is because against certain decks, throwing the crit sentinel and Brilliant Blister on the Vanguard swing does so much for 3 cards in hand. Throwing the crit sentinel and Brilliant Blister on the Vanguard swing does so much. For 3 cards in hand, you probably fully guard 2 attacks, whereas if we didn't have the crit sentinels, that would become 4 guards due to the PG's extra discard. Heal Guardians to make the early game easier, as well as random grade 3s to be soul charged for Antlion. I think if there was something to mess around in the trigger zone, I would want to try for more vanilla draws as discard targets for Brilliant Blister as well as S, but giving up crits when we aim to always swing Vanguard first and have such a big front row seems like a waste of triggers. Let's talk about other options we can run as well. Obviously, you can play it more vanilla and play the base Giraffa as your first ride to have more Giraffas in deck. Doing this, you are obviously playing more towards the restand threat of Ura rather than the crit and guard restrictive Antlion. As such, you would want more cards that can help push cards into Soul for Ura-Giraffa. I think the peak of this strategy would be to use the base Giraffa to Soul in another base Giraffa, then use Butterfly Officer to push another base Giraffa into Soul at the end of turn. This way, when you ride into Ura, you would already have 3 Giraffas in Soul. I'm also 50-50 on certain Cradle mechanics for the deck. Being able to Cradle grade 3s to be able to search Giraffas for re-ride is, yes, good towards that strategy, but at the moment, there's too many ways to clean the Cradle, in which case you've wasted your resources. As for a must run, once it comes out, Charming Mutant Sweet Cocktail is a fantastic grade 2. It gives you another great ride target and another way of converting Soul that you get from S and M into cards in hand. This probably replaces the Bloody Hercules 4-4. At the moment, unfortunately because of how fast V Premium is, I think that Mega Colony is just not there yet. Stifled by needed restrictions such as no standing units, open circles, That being said, I honestly believe that Ura-Giraffa could make waves if more of the top of V Premium was shaved off. In any case, that's it from me for this episode of Clan Collection Cores. Be sure to subscribe to the channel for more content like this and leave a comment down below because every little bit helps. This has been Toku from YellowCard Vanguard. Toku out.